All right, deep divers, ready for another deep dive. Today, we're going beyond just the headlines about this next SpaceX launch. We're talking Starship Flight 5. This mission is, well, it's so ambitious they could like totally rewrite the rules of space travel. We'll be looking at some recent reports from Spaceflight Now and Space.com today. You know, gotta have our sources.
Right.
You're gonna help us understand why this launch has like everyone in the space community on the edge of their seats.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one for sure.
Okay, you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Starship, it's not just another rocket, right?
No, not at all. It's designed to be the world's biggest and most powerful launch vehicle ever, like ever built.
Wow, okay.
So to give you an idea, imagine something even larger than the Saturn V, the one that took us to the moon.
Okay, yeah, wow. I'm getting goosebumps already, and we haven't even gotten to the launch, so it's big, powerful. But what's the grand plan here? What will all this power let SpaceX actually, do?
Okay, so in the near future, Starship is going to play a critical role in NASA's Artemis program. Specifically, they're planning to use a Starship variant to actually land astronauts on the moon for the Artemis III mission.
Oh, wow.
Which is aiming for a 2026 launch.
2026?
Yeah.
That's practically tomorrow. But SpaceX, Elon Musk, they've got their sights set even further, right? Mars is close.
Oh, absolutely. Musk sees Starship as like the key to making humanity a multi-planetary species. And he's not just talking either. He's already sold seats for future Starship missions to billionaires.
Oh, wow.
People like Jared Isaacman, Yusaku Maezawa.
I've heard those names.
Some of those trips are even going to be like lunar excursions.
Yeah.
Like imagine like taking a vacation to the moon.
Talk about a luxury getaway. But before we all book our lunar flights, let's get back to this upcoming launch. What makes Flight 5 so groundbreaking, even for Starship?
Two major things. First, SpaceX is going to attempt to catch the Super Heavy booster. That's the massive first stage of the rocket. They're going to try to couch it using the chopsticks arms of their launch tower, which they nicknamed Mechazilla.
Mechazilla, that's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, wait, hold on. Catch the booster. Like, it sounds like a giant space claw machine.
Kind of, yeah.
What's the advantage of catching it, though? Why not let it splash down in the ocean like they've done before?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Reusability. SpaceX has already, revolutionized spaceflight with its Falcon 9 program, which uses reusable boosters that land back on Earth after launch,
right,
which has drastically reduced the cost of spaceflight. And now they're aiming to do the same thing with Starship, but on a much grander scale and a much more challenging scale.
Okay, so by catching the booster instead of letting it, take a bath in the ocean, they can reuse it potentially many times.
Exactly. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Imagine if we discarded a jumbo jet after every single flight. That's basically what traditional rocketry is like. SpaceX is working to make space travel more like commercial air travel, where you can use the same vehicle multiple times.
That makes sense.
And this rapid reusability is essential for making those frequent and, importantly, more affordable. Trips to the moon, Mars, and beyond. It's about making space accessible not just to astronauts and billionaires, but potentially even to you one day.
That's the dream, right? Affordable space travel. But let's be real. Catching a giant rocket booster, that's got to be unbelievably difficult. What are the chances they actually pull this off? It's like they're trying to thread a needle while on a roller coaster. At night, during a hurricane, the sheer audacity of trying this is mind-blowing. But what are some of the specific challenges they face with this, catch attempt?
Well, for one, the Super Heavy booster has 33 Raptor engines, generating just an unbelievable amount of thrust. We're talking like 10 times the power of a Falcon 9 rocket.
Whoa, okay.
So catching something that powerful with the Mechazilla chopsticks arms is going to require absolutely pinpoint precision.
Okay, so it's not just about catching it. It's about catching it perfectly. What happens if they miss? Are we talking like a huge explosion?
A miss would definitely be dramatic. But SpaceX has built safety measures into every step of this process. The most likely outcome is that the booster would just fall back into the ocean, like previous launches.
Okay.
Of course, not ideal, because that means they wouldn't be able to reuse the booster, which is the whole point.
Right, of course. So each attempt is incredibly high stakes. What about the environmental impact of this launch? I remember reading about some, tension between SpaceX and the FAA.
Oh, right. You're thinking of the water deluge system.
Yeah.
So basically, SpaceX uses a massive amount of water during launch to suppress noise and debris, and the FAA has raised some concerns about the environmental effects of all that water runoff.
Interesting.
It's a classic example of the tension between rapid innovation and regulatory oversight.
Innovation versus regulation, a tale as old as time, it seems. But let's not forget about Starship itself. They aren't catching that with giant chopsticks, are they?
Definitely not. After separating from the booster, Starship will continue on its own path, aiming for a controlled landing in the Indian Ocean.
A controlled landing, huh? Didn't a previous Starship test flight have some trouble with that? Something about a heat shield.
Ah, yes. You're remembering Flight 4 back in June. That flight had a few issues with the heat shield tiles. They came loose during re-entry. Those tiles are critical for protecting the spacecraft from the crazy temperatures generated by atmospheric friction.
So without those tiles, Starship would basically become a very expensive shooting star.
Well, that might be simplifying it a bit. But essentially, yes. The heat generated during re-entry is hot enough to melt metal. Those tiles are absolutely essential.
Wow.
Now, SpaceX has spent a lot of time and resources since that last mishap, redesigning and reinforcing the heat shield. They've added newer generation tiles and extra layers of protection, so hopefully that did the trick.
Fingers crossed. Because a smooth re-entry is just as important as that booster catch. So much is riding on this launch. What happens if they pull it off? What if they stick both landings? Okay, so let's talk about what happens if they actually pull this off. Imagine SpaceX sticks both landings. The super heavy catch A&E Starship returns to the ocean. What does that mean, like for SpaceX, for space exploration, for you and me?
That's when things get really exciting, if they actually succeed. It would be like a monumental achievement for SpaceX.
Yeah.
Huge validation of their whole reusable rocket technology. Imagine, rapid, reliable, potentially even routine trips to space. This would be a complete game changer for like all their ambitious plans.
So instead of just reading about billionaires taking joyrides to space, regular folks like us might have a shot someday.
Exactly. It could open up space travel in ways we can't even imagine. And for SpaceX, it would really fast-track everything. Their plans for a lunar base, a Martian city, and even beyond it.
Wow, okay, I can practically hear the collective gasp of the entire space community right now. But we have to ask about the other side of the coin, too. What if they don't succeed? What if this ambitious double landing attempt doesn't quite go to plan?
Well, setbacks are kind of inevitable with any pioneering endeavor, especially something as like complex as spaceflight. A failure, while disappointing, would still give SpaceX valuable data. They would analyze everything that went wrong, make adjustments, and then, try again. Remember, innovation is often a process.
Yeah, it's like that saying, you learn more from failure than from success. SpaceX definitely seems to take that to heart. But delays with Starship could have, like, a domino effect, couldn't they? Especially for NASA.
Oh, absolutely. NASA's really relying on Starship for the Artemis program. Any major setbacks would probably impact the timeline for those lunar missions. And then there's always the possibility of more scrutiny from places like the FAA. They'll be watching this launch very closely, assessing the environmental impact and safety measures, all of that.
So much is riding on this single launch, Flight 5. It's almost hard to fathom. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, is there one key takeaway, one thing our listeners should keep in mind as they watch this historic event?
Well, I think regardless of the outcome on launch day, we're seeing a really pivotal moment in space exploration. SpaceX is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible, challenging all our assumptions about space travel. So whether they stick the landing or not, their ambition and determination is really inspiring. And I think that's something worth celebrating.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. So deep divers, keep your eyes on the skies, because Starship Flight 5 is more than just a launch. It's a glimpse into a future where humanity's reach might just extend beyond Earth.